Yep. Hello, hello, Professor Vicki Chen. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It is great to have you here.
Mhm.
Um, this is the interview for MSA newsletter Q1 2025, and we would like to start with your bio.
Hi. Oh, great. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be part of this the MSA and and your interview. But it's been a bit of a privilege to be here. So just a little bit about my background. Many of you might know that I actually I was born in Taiwan, but my parents immigrated to the U.S. and I grew up in the U.S. And I actually grew up in a small town in Tennessee, and I joke with people that I used to have an accent a little bit like Dolly Parton,
Yeah.
which is very much in contrast with my being from Taiwan. But then went to MIT as an undergraduate in chemical engineering. My father was a chemical engineer.
Oh, I didn't know that part. Okay, your father
Yeah,
was
so I followed in his footstep, and I particularly loved chemical engineering because I really enjoyed that breadth. I enjoyed biology, I enjoyed chemistry, I love maths. And I was always, as a kid, the person who loved going to the hardware store. So I knew I was
Mm,
cut out to be an engineer.
yeah.
um, but the
I'm
other
sorry.
thing is,
What was the date? If we can have like chronologically, that's so. When was the date you went to the MIT?
I,
Um,
I 1979.
1979. Great.
So it's really quite an interesting period because, at that time, the energy crisis is on quite a, still, when we discuss how, dynamic and uncertainty, that period was also, a period of great transformation. And the energy crisis and all the ramification of, oil blockades and things like that were playing out.
Mm,
So at that time, that I was looking that I was thinking, well, I'm going to end up working for a big petrochemical company,
yeah,
and
obviously.
do research. And interesting enough, by the time I graduated, we were starting to see a diversification where chemical engineers went to. They were
Hmm.
going into pharmaceuticals, they were going into high-tech manufacturing, semiconductors. So that the image of a chemical engineer being in front of a big distillation tower and
Yeah.
was actually starting to pass.
Mm,
So my generation was on the cusp of that change where chemical engineering started to pivot away from, I would say, the traditional um, view of the petrochemical industry.
mm,
So when I did my PhD, I went to the University of Minnesota. And again, it was really interesting. That was during that period of 83, 88, is that the enormous change in surface and colloid science occurred at that time.
okay.
Like people started to be able to measure surface forces. People started to understand, um, the intermolecular forces between
Mm,
particles, And so
mm,
all that change into nanomaterials, colloid science, surface science
mm.
rapidly was developing during that period. So I actually ended up working, my PhD supervisor was in fact, although in the chemical engineering department, was actually a physical chemist.
Ah, okay.
So I learned a lot, as I say, in that colloid and surface chemistry um,
So it wasn't
back
membrane. Your PhD topic wasn't membrane
in
still.
my PhD, but that background was incredibly useful for what happened, my research area later on. I had friends who were in the membrane group that was literally next door. So I was still, I really wanted to do membranes as a PhD student,
Uh,
but
so,
it
so the
ended up
first
not.
time that you heard the membrane was during your PhD in between
That's
83 and
right.
88.
Well, actually not. I actually knew about membranes because my father did his PhD in hollow
Ah,
fiber.
wow.
Mass
I didn't know
transfer.
this part. I didn't know this bit.
Did some, yeah, some of his PhD was touched upon that area, but I knew more about it because later up at University of Minnesota, because my friends and colleagues, literally next lab over, worked for Ed Kussler, a very well-known membrane uh, scientist and engineer, and they were particularly working on hollow fiber and mass transfer in those systems. So I was very keen on the sort of working in that area. So after my PhD, I had an opportunity to come to Australia. My husband's Australian, and we moved to Sydney, and I was given an introduction to Chris Bell and Tony Fain, people that I should contact for me to, potentially look at job seeking in Australia and also potentially some research opportunities. So,
what was the date that you contacted Crystal or Tony Finn?
probably so arrived probably August 1988. Yeah.
So 1998, you landed in Australia.
1988.
1988. Okay. Okay. So just right after your PhD.
Yes, straight after.
Wow.
I literally got on the finished my PhD and within a few weeks in Australia. So
okay.
So I tell people that my journey in the academic world was quite accidental, because as I said, when I was doing my PhD, many in the US, many chemical engineering HDR students, we all went to industry.
Correct.
Almost very few of us would have really been focused on an academic career.
It's very common.
Yeah, that's right. So coming to Australia, the pathway is quite different. There's not that much, we don't have a giant petrochemical industry, although obviously we have a very large resource industry. Especially the industrial research infrastructure is not like, in the US or Europe. So the opportunity was for me to I said I would do a few years at UNSW in the membrane lab, which is a research area I was really interested in getting into, and then probably go back and work for the giant petrochemical fossil fuels company again, back in the US or other places. But in the end, membrane research really engaged me. I really enjoyed it. At that time, also, the context is the membrane group, which is now the Center for Membrane Science Technology, UNESCO Center, was one of the first Center of Excellences when they rolled out that program. So I was able to join a very vibrant group of researchers, and also the other thing, of course, they got sustained funding for us to then be able to explore many different areas of membrane research. So, and bringing my background in colloids and surface science was actually a great match. I worked a lot on protein filtration, particle filtration, surface modification. So that great intersection of what I actually did for my PhD with my interest in membranes really kicked.
What was your first role at UNSW?
I was a postdoc. Yeah.
Postdoc, okay. In 1988, you joined the UNSW as a postdoc, and then, okay, so.
And I spent quite a few years as a postdoc because we had sustained funding.
Sustained funding. And who was your supervisor, Tony Fain or back then, or Chris Phil?
I worked specifically with Tony, although Chris also was involved in some of the research. Chris at that time also, of course, became dean.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was, at that time, I think, head of school, and then while I was that early few years, he became dean. But he still kept a very close relations and maintain a research group. So we would have research meetings in the dean's unit
Yep.
at
Yeah.
UNSW. So it was quite a really exciting period of membrane
Mm-hmm. So,
science.
and then the first ongoing position was lecturer or senior lecturer back then?
Yeah, so lecture and then
Lecturer.
and that was quite a few years later. Yes, I got that lecture role in 1996.
1996.
And I and this is probably one of the stories for early career researchers, is that I had no intention of becoming an academic. And it was actually a few years of really enjoying doing research that when Tony Fain asked me to cover a class in fluid mechanics in
I
pumps,
see.
he said, I've had somebody going on a sabbatical. I need somebody desperately to cover
To take
class.
over.
Would you step in? You've got a chemical engineering degree. I was like, okay. At that time, I had no training in teaching.
Wow.
I'd, tutor some classes or something. And I said, okay. And I sort of jumped into the deep end, suddenly had to front up and teach all these chemical engineers about pumps and pumping.
Yeah, okay.
But I enjoyed it. And this is the first time I realized, well, perhaps being an academic might actually be an attractive career path.
Yeah, very interesting. And then you promoted to senior lecturer, following by associate professor. And when was the time that you become the director of the center, UNESCO Center?
I'm just trying to let me think. When was that? I have to look up my. I think it was 2000 and 2006, something like that.
2000. And it was the time that you became before that became full prof or after that?
It was. I think it was. I will need to check. I believe it's close to being the same time. Very close in time.
Very close. I'm pretty sure you were both head of the director of the center and full prof, because 2008 I joined your group in 2008, and you were like back then. Cool.
Yes. So yeah, and look, I was with the center for and the membrane center, and we used to call the membrane family, and also at that time the UNESCO Center of Membrane Science was probably the only really large membrane center
in Australia,
compared to now, where we have a number of very large membrane groups and in Australia. So, but it's one of those very delightful things to see that's grown enormously across.
Yeah, thanks to you and Tony Fain and Chris Phil and Hans Koster and those who really helped the community. So then I think you became head of a school in 2012 or 13. Am I right?
Yes, I think it's 2014.
2014, I remember that. And then a few years later, you become dean of UQ in 2000.
That's right. So I spent 4 years as head of school, almost exactly 4 years as head of school of chemical engineering at UNSW. And then, yes, moved to University of Queensland to be the dean of engineering, architecture, and IT.
Yeah, I remember it was three faculties or 2 faculties back then. Yeah, 2018. Yep. And then it was a time that your admin role become more dominant and eventually now you in 2000 when you joined UTS in 2000
at the end of 2022, yeah. 2022,
fantastic journey. All right, so back to the membrane research journey. You mentioned that during your PhD, well, even before that, because your dad was a PhD in chem eng and with hollow fibers. I didn't know that part. Also, I know you for more than 17 years. So, so what are the most exciting or unexpected finding that you've made in your research membrane sort of journey?
Oh,
if you want to pick one of them, or the more
that's hard to it's hard to put my hand on. So I've been very fortunate to work across a whole range of areas. I think it's one of the I think pleasures of working in the membrane field. So I think the one that would be, I think, close to your heart is around the making super hydrophobic membranes. And
Beautiful.
I think one of the things that really is really a pleasure was the fact we started because on that project because there was inconsistencies in the literature.
Correct.
And normally people say, this discovery comes out of this sort of out of a surprise or something you did fantastically. But actually, the project is actually driven by the fact that when people were adding titanium particles, there was inconsistent reporting throughout the whole literature in the membrane field. People say it's a photocatalytic effect. It's a roughness effect. It's a topology effect. And we started doing that because we said, let's resolve what it is.
Correct.
Let's find out. And it turned out to be, of course, more complex than but I think that led then to thinking about then how we make nanocomposite membranes. How does roughness come into play? And later on, and the reason we pulled this is probably the fact that we were able to make this hybrid, inorganic, organic composite that had these super hydrophobic and be able to also do the modifications, super hydrophobicity and I said Janus membranes with
later on,
super hydrophobicity. Was spawned a huge number of the things that we did later on, which is the material side, the material science side of my work, as well as the work on membrane distillation, the work on surface coatings, all
and later on enzymatic immobilization.
Enzymatic, yeah. And that was reinforced a few years ago when I was applying for the ETSI fellowship, and I asked for a referee letter from one of the editors of Journal Membrane Science, and he said, he wrote in his letter, he said, this is one of the most important things that your research did, was changing the way that we thought about how we can modify membranes for superhydrophobicity and understanding the role of topology and chemistry surface. And so that was a really quite striking. He pulled out.
Wow, that was very interesting.
One of the
I didn't know that part as well.
Yeah, that he pulled out. That was one of the he thought was the most things that we brought, and he said that made other people really think how by changing the architecture of the surface, changing and manipulating that surface, that they can get all kinds of enormously different behaviors. And previously had been very, either you use, super hydrophobic polymers or approach. So, but yeah, I thought that was really interesting that got pulled out as one of the more important things that we did as a group. So, but that work spawned a whole. You can probably trace that work to spawning all the many things that we subsequently did. For probably the last 20 years after.
I think they've been those sort of publications. They've got highly cited. In the last 10, 15 years.
Yes, that's right. So it was So I think we kind of could validate that perhaps is one of the more exciting things that came out. I would probably say the work that we've done in the last 5 years around metal-organic framework membranes would probably be another thing. But actually, it actually complements that work because making super hydrophobic or ceramic mimic surfaces allow us to make those moth coatings, which
it's still somehow rooted into that.
Yes, it was a root to that. So you can trace that lineage of where that work kind of evolved over basically 15 years, which has led us to eventually, as a science paper in moths.
Beautiful. conscious of the time, so we probably need to switch to this next part of the interview. ECR, MCR. Vicki, well, I was one of the early career researchers back then, now mid-career researchers. One of the issues that people, the fresh PhD students or ECR, MCR, is to get, and we're very interested in the membrane science and technology. But sometimes there are few challenges. First of all, how we could secure ongoing position, and if you manage to do that, how you can secure funding, funding. And because I know you closely, you never had, at least from our perspective, issue with securing funds because you were always successful in one DP after another, and even how do you manage things? What's your share some of your experience under your belt. Give us some advice and tips, particularly for early mid-career researchers who are active in the membrane research areas.
Yes. Look, it's very interesting. When you say your profession is and I've been very lucky, been able to secure a number of discovery grants. But I also want to reflect on the very early days when I was a senior lecturer. The only grant I had was a $5,000 CRC.
Wow.
But actually, what the threshold was, of course, I was able to leverage equipment, within the center laboratories. But what was the threshold was I was able to get that my students were able to get scholarships, and I was able to support them. So some of it is really having the privilege of leveraging off of existing infrastructure, but also being able to attract students with a project that really engaged them. So. So that's how I actually started. You start small, and that was really small.
Always,
yeah. Like, it's like saying the good old days where when you started your startup package was $2,500 a computer.
Yeah.
But probably a more long range, a more strategic approach is, we have to be. We often have to really think about balancing our grant funding portfolio. We can't, the days that we can live from a discovery grant to discovery grant, even if you're successful, doesn't have, they have very short timelines, barely pays for a postdoc. So you have to have multiple streams of funding. So being flexible and open to think about, how you engage in those opportunities. And that's particularly challenging for ECRs, MCRs, because unlike somebody with an established group who has excess capacity of, taking on something a little bit extra, you have to ECRs don't have necessarily that extra capacity, but it is really thinking much more broadly about, I'm not just going to focus on discovery grant. Yes, they're kind of a frosting on the cake. We have to look at opportunities to engage in those other smaller activities to build up your ability to write and pitch, grants. And one of the things is that communication skills. You learn to, I always tell people that, you write the grant, the first paragraph of the grant is if people don't understand the importance of what you're doing, then you will, your chances of being successful is considerably diminished.
Yeah. The first impression is the last impression always.
That's right. And also, I would say things have changed significantly. When we were writing discovery grants probably many years ago, we knew like the people refereeing those were likely to be quite expert in the area. What we're finding these days are people who read your grant may actually come from a much more diverse area. So you have to write in a different way. You have to engage people to say, even if they don't quite understand all the technical aspects, they need to understand why what you do is important and why it's significant. So having that come out early is a really important skill set in ability to write and to pitch, grant proposals. networking is really important. People have name recognition in terms of being sure people are aware that you're working in a certain area, having visibility, and of course, as I said, those are always challenges for ECR, MCR, but I know many schools and universities do try to support young academics in that way. So I don't underestimate that we also live in a much more competitive world now compared to when I was coming through, the competition is global. It's very, very high, very competitive, and therefore, we have to think beyond just and I'm sure many academics already think that way, but it's always being sure that, you do manage that both global profile as well as local profile. So it's important. MSA does have a very important purpose in that, is that it can give visibility to our ECR, MCR, to the international community, because we bring them in, and that is an opportunity to showcase our HER students, our early career students, if they don't themselves have that ability to.
Beautiful. I think there is a list of tips and advice. Thank you very much. I think, starting from the HTRs and students being flexible, ability to, write and pitch in an efficient way, know your target audience, communication skills, networking, visibility, think out of box, global profile, local profile. Oh, thank you very much. I think these are a list of the things that probably we can have a workshop on that at some point.
No, absolutely. And I was fortunate to talk to, the MSA conferences, to talk to ECRs. And, this is a very common thing, a common question of, and of course, the challenge is always getting that first job,
Of course, yeah.
And then the continuing position. And it is challenging. So however we can help people, present themselves the best, it is really...
Yeah. So there was
things that we can do as mentors.
Yeah, exactly. So, Vicki, considering your current position at UTS, where do you see the because it's a lot of question from for early career researchers, even I'm getting those sort of questions. Where do you see in the future in terms of opening position and continuing position in the Australian university ecosystems, particularly for chemical engineering or membrane related research that could end up in ongoing positions?
Oh, that is a toughie. Look, I think if it wasn't already competitive before, it will be even more competitive now. I think I think we as a university will be having to balance, our workforce. I talk this in terms of, teaching focus, a balance, or T&L academics and research focus academics. So I think some of the challenges we'll have is if there's constriction in funding, through either government or international student fees, the opportunities for research-only tracks are going to be extraordinarily tight. If we have a solid ability to sustain our domestic and international enrollment, we can still manage to, create a steady a flow of balanced academic positions. But that, as I said, this last year was one of the most disruptive for the higher education sector. I was at a VC a conference with vice chancellors, and they said they've never seen, probably in the last 10 to 15 years, as much change due to what's come down from the federal government policy settings and visa settings and things like that. So I think one of the things is we have to be flexible, and we have to also, people will have to look maybe at going overseas, coming back, moving, cities, and the opportunities may, always the opportunities and timing is you're kind of hostage when things overall. So it's
right time, right place.
yeah. So it's not going to be a matter of I'm sitting here waiting for something to open up at UTS.
Of course.
It's to be able to say, how can I position myself to have to understand what kind of opportunities. And I also do encourage, our researchers to, when they do have an opportunity to do some teaching, because no matter what, your likelihood is that you'll be moved, you may transition back and forth between research only, teaching position and balance, or say what I call teaching help. So having that as part of your skill set, and it's like, it actually contributes to helping me be a much better scientific and research presenter.
Correct.
So yeah, it's keeping your options open and being sure that you look. So I don't think there'll be a complete dearth of positions, but I think the mix might change. And you can also see that in terms of where the narrative now is very much about impact, translation, so you have to be able to frame what you do in those contexts. Even though you might be doing some very, very fundamental work, you need to be able to frame what you do as having impact and in society, economy, and as well. So that's probably the things that universities are starting to look for a little bit more.
Just like very short question, where do you see the future of, I mean, you talked about translation and commercialization. What's your advice for researchers, particularly ECR, MCR, because particularly ECR, you want to, everyone understands you want to build up your portfolio, you want to have publications, you want to get citation, impact factor. But if you want to move towards commercialization and entrepreneurship, that type of roadmap, pathways, what's your advice? What's your thoughts on it?
I think it is. It may occur in different parts of your career, but it's also not an either or, because sometimes people say it's either this or that. So if you're wanting to do that, be sure you know how to speak the language of industry. And that will serve you well, no matter if you stay in a so-called traditional academic track, or you do go along that wanting to pursue a commercialization. And people also have to be realistic. Commercialization takes multiple years, and it's a commitment down a certain road, and it's not always necessarily going to be easy to return to a traditional academic. But universities are more open these days, I think, to people who have been in industry and have come back. So I think it's probably not as locked down as it used to be, but you have to, even if you go into industry, you still will need to maintain, if you want to come back to a more traditional academic, maintain some degree of publication, or like not necessarily the quantum, but quality. So this is the other thing, is that even people on traditional academic track, people are now much more aware about the quality of your publication, not just the quantity. Numbers. Yeah, so it's not people really are being much more discerning about that, and a lot more scrutiny about publications and impact. Impacts. Yeah, so I do all the promotions at UTS. So I read hundreds of promotion applications. Similarly, in my former role at UQ. And one of the things is really asking people to really, be able to talk about the impact of their work, even if they have 3 publications or 50 publications. We will be wanting to know what's your role in that, and what is the impact. How can you evidence the impact of? So it doesn't matter. Say people who go down that commercialization track, yes, that is certainly very worthwhile, but you still probably want to be sure you keep a bit of turnover in quality publications. Quality publication, 100%. Vicki, where do you think the research in membrane will go, or is going, the emerging trends? Oh, you probably can tell me that more than um. If I was to look, I think there's still the areas of energy and sustainability will still be there, but it'll be different aspect. I was I was obviously very involved in the area of water and just desalination. And I think that still will be very important, but it's turned to different aspects now, like PFAS and emerging contaminants. So it's still going to be water, but it's going to be interesting. The focus will continue to be evolved. Energy, I think, will always be there. And I do encourage people to think about where does membrane sit in that energy, system, whether it's battery separators, is it for generation of, hydrogen or sources? And we see the demand for both water and energy keep continuing.
Up.
So I don't think we will ever walk away from those areas, but there'll be manifestation that'll be different. So as I said, there's evolution where membranes and batteries and energy generation comes to play, but also highly compromised water issues are now obviously very hot. And also, I think there's no shortage of problems with water. That's going to so those mega areas will still be there. I think there'll be iterations of that within what we do as a membrane community.
So what's your thoughts on the material development for membranes or new processes?
The new materials is, it's exciting, but I think it's still challenging. I got up at a ICOM meeting. I was at an ICOM meeting where they were talking about new materials, and one of the big membrane companies said, we only use 5 materials, and we still need 5. And you can understand they're not perfect material, but they're chemically robust. They're inexpensive, and those are really hard things to break. I think the new materials will have to come where there's a real value add. I said, energy, batteries. The really large scale membrane treatment. I think is still going to be reliant on the usual cast of suspects, so to speak. But incremental improvements is going to still continue in that. Processes are still going to be important. They never will go away. But it'd be interesting to discuss. Maybe that's something an MSA discussion we can have is, given the maturity of our existing membrane processes, what's next?
What's next? That's always a question.
It's like we have reverse osmosis. We have membrane
very mature.
We've got it's hard. I don't osmotic pressure retarded, osmotic it's all these things, but it's not completely clear what is next. Are we just kind of reshuffling very good process and optimizing them, or finding new applications for them? Or is there going to be a material that really changes the game? And that's where maybe the materials is there a killer application that's going to completely change the ball game in terms of. But yeah, I haven't really seen something jump out at me yet. But I think we could feel reassured that at least the water and energy is still be with us for forever.
Correct, 100%. We try to limit the interview duration to 45 minutes. We're going to finish off the interview with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And so the first question is, if you weren't a scientist, what career would you have chosen?
Sorry, if I was
if you weren't a scientist, what career would you have chosen?
I think when I was young, I had aspirations to to almost be an architect.
Architect, nice.
I loved drawing, drawing houses, constructing cities, building things, sort of thing.
Beautiful.
So,
Very interesting.
I don't know whether or not I ever have gone down that route, but certainly that attracted me. I mean, the broad science areas always attracted me. Biology really attracted me. But if we were to step completely away from that, economics and economic history was.
Economic history, wow.
Yeah,
Very
I
different.
enjoy history, but economic history was really interesting. I did what I call a cluster of general studies when I was an undergraduate at MIT on economics, microeconomics and economic history. And I still read the Wall Street Journal
Wow.
and other business publications avidly because it really engages me because it has both the psychology of how people think as well as enormous, obviously, impact on
of course,
on society and
on daily lives.
And how we make choices in the things that we invest and distribute.
Yeah.
Things.
All right. So second question, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I don't know if it's the best piece of advice, but I would just say one of the more consequential pieces of advice would be being in a corridor and somebody saying to me, "Have you thought about being an academic?"
It was a turning point.
Yeah. So as I said, I told you I really didn't think, I was just going in industry. Still was, even at UNSW I was going to go back to industry at some point. And it was the fact that somebody who was not in the membrane group, but was the head of school at that time, Mark Wainwright, who later became, very, at UNSW, he ran into me and said, have you really thought about it? Maybe you should think about this, of being an academic. And that's how I said, oh, no. But 2 years later, when the opportunity came up, it was going, well, okay, somebody thinks that I have the potential to be an academic.
He planted the seed a couple of years
ago. Yeah, so then I thought, well, if somebody thinks that I had the potential, well, maybe I should think seriously about it. And the fact that they noticed, even though they were not a close, in the same research group or anything, but the fact that they noticed and said, I think you've got potential, was actually very important. And I have told this story many times, but I think this is an example where I said people can give you a nudge in the right direction, but just also say, have you thought about?
Have you thought about? Beautiful. Coffee or tea?
Both.
Very political.
Coffee in the morning, tea the rest of the day.
Okay, and the last.
I have more than like 2 coffees. I can't get to bed. But I like my coffee in the morning. I stagger in the door.
Yeah, me too. And the last question is, if you were to choose one city to spend the rest of your life, what would be that city?
I think where I am now.
Sydney.
Yeah. Our family's here. It's a metropolitan, global, cosmopolitan city.
Yeah.
Weather is wonderful. I mean, it's kind of hard to beat.
Yeah. Yes. I love Sydney too. I love Sydney. Yeah. I consider Sydney my second home. Always like more than 10 years.
Yeah, and you don't appreciate, how multicultural it is.
It is. Yeah. Indeed.
I grew up in a small town in the U.S. and as much as that was really great to grow up there. I say my children's experience being in a multicultural city like Sydney is just entirely different experience. But of course, it's so expensive.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
It's so desirable. It's so expensive.
Yeah, it's so expensive. Yeah. Thank you very much. It was an honor to have you here,
No,
Professor
no, it's
Vicki
great.
Chen.
It's a
Appreciate it.
very, it's a very lighthearted.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, seriously, I always enjoy, at these events at conferences to talk to ECRs, NCR. But I do reflect, my experience, is in the past, but also I hope I could give people some perspective of what the sector looks like now, and having the privilege of being in the current role that I'm in. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd love to hope that we'll see you, soon somewhere at the conference.
Somewhere, in IMSTEC maybe soon, or maybe earlier than that, somewhere in time. Yep. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. And if you have any last word for the community, to share anything.
No, I guess we'll just say we will hope to see you at IMSTEC.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
You have a good day. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.